Okay, exporting to an SVG file for your cutting machines from version 9 is so much easier. I do have a video, if you have previous versions, I have a video on how to export an SVG file for cutting machines in version 8, and I'll put a link to that in the description below if you still have version 8. So, but this video is about how to do it in version 9, and also I did find a bug in the process, so I'll get to that as we go through the video. It isn't a major bug. There's an easy workaround. It has been reported to Bernina, and they have sent it on to the to Wilcom as a bug, and at some stage I'm sure we'll get an update and it will include a fix for this, hopefully. So without further ado, let's go on and go through the process of exporting an SVG file from your applique, so you can cut your applique fabric with your cutting machine rather than cut it with scissors or cut in place. It's often much neater to cut your fabric, pre-cut your applique pieces and have a backing on them, either a sticky back applique backing or an iron in place applique backing that you can use to place your fabric, because you get a nice clean edge, and you don't, if you cut in place, often you get little hairy bits of the fabric poking out. It's never quite as neat. So this is a good process. You can also, of course, create a cut file for your embroidery machine if you have the cut work tool and you don't have a cutting machine, but that's a different process. So this video is about the cutting machines. So in the applique toolbox, if I open that up, we have this new tool, Export Cutting File. So I've got a very simple applique here. I just created it with the digitized applique with holes, which is also new in the software. So I just had to create the shape and then create the hole and then hit enter, and it created an applique for me with the placement line, the tack down line, and the cover stitch. Now, of course, you can go to object properties, and if you go to the applique tab, you can make all sorts of adjustments to the actual applique cover stitch and the placement line, etc. You've got new functions in here as well. I'll cover those in another video. You can place your fabric in and or a color in this box as well. So but we'll cover that in another video. So I'll just close that object properties, and here's my applique object. Now all you need to do is click on the export cutting file. Now I've only got the one applique, so I don't, embroidery shapes is grayed out and cut work shapes is grayed out because I don't have a cut work line in the design, and embroidery shapes, because this is an applique and it's all not actually grouped together, but it's all one design. It's not the same as if you did an advanced applique with various embroidery shapes, etc., to build up your applique. This was created with an outline, so you don't have that option for this sort of applique. But in your advanced applique, you could in fact create cut lines for the embroidery shapes that you used in that. I'm not sure how useful that is, but that is available. And up here we've got export current design, which is, we've got the current design. Or if you had various different appliques in the one design, you could select the objects that you wanted to export a design for and export only the selected objects. You would need to select your objects before you open this toolbox. The layout, automatically distributed or as digitized. As digitized will put all your cut lines on top of each other. So if you have more than one applique shape in a design and you're exporting the whole design, then and you export it as digitized, all your cut lines will be on top of each other as the design is digitized. But if you want them to come out separate and spread out, you will want to choose automatically distributed. In this instance, because it's a simple applique, it won't matter because there's only going to be one shape, so there's not going to be any cut lines on top of each other, so I don't need to change anything here. But if I will show you a more complex one later in the video where automatically distributed is a much better option. Down here we've got our export to set locations. Now by default we've got a new file in our embroidery library called My Cutting Files. So we've got in embroidery library we have, I'll just open embroidery library with the file explorer, or I'll navigate to it with the file explorer. So if I go to embroidery, so under my embroidery in your embroidery library we had my designs and my machine file folders. We now have this new My Cutting Files folder. So by default all cutting files that you export will go to this folder. Now you can change that, so I'll just close that again. So if you're exporting to set locations, that would be the set location, which is the one shown here. Now though, as I said, you can change that. So if you don't want your cut files to go into that My Cutting Files for some reason, you've got somewhere else you want to send them, you can change your set locations by clicking on that button, and then this option will come up. So as you can see, all the cut files here all go to the same place, My Cutting Files, but you do have this browse option where you can create a new folder or different folders. So you might want to create a folder for just cut work files, one for applique shapes or whatever. That's entirely up to you. I'm just going to leave the default folders, but they are the set locations. So if you choose, I'll just cancel that. If you choose to export to set locations, whatever you choose up here will still go to My Cutting Files. Now if you change it, it will go to the set location you changed it to, so you don't have to worry about filling in where you want your cut file to go. But if you choose export to, you can browse for each individual project you're working on and send it to an individual file by browsing here. And you can choose the exact file that you want that particular cut file to go to. So if you are working on a project and you want to keep the cut file with the embroidery design with some notes or whatever all in one folder, then you would choose the export to option and browse to wherever you wanted to put your cut work file. And then you can give the design a name. Now it automatically takes the name of the design that you've got. So I've got export cut file up here as my name, and I believe you can change this here, but I haven't experimented with that so that it's different to what your actual design name is, because you can type over that, but I haven't played around with that. So you can play around with that if you want to give it a different name to what your design name is. Alright, now I'm just going to click on export, and it has exported the cut file to that set location, which is My Cut Files. So if I browse now to, in my file explorer, to the libraries, embroidery and My Cutting Files, you can see here that the export cut file I just exported is here. Now by default, if you click on it, it will open up in internet, in your Edge browser. I'm going to open it with Corel though, so I'm going to right click on Corel, on the cut file, and open with, choose that option, and then you can choose whichever program you want to open it with. So I'm going to choose CorelDRAW. And there is my cut file. Now the beauty of this is it's exactly the same as if you added applique patterns to your print preview and the print options you have in the software for printing out your design template and all that sort of thing, you do have an option there to print cut files, but print applique shapes, patterns, and this is exactly the same. But the beauty of being able to open this in Corel is that by default, I've got 0.1 of a millimetre. It's a very fine line that is printed from your print options in the software for the applique patterns, and it's very hard to actually see. It is so fine. So in Corel we could actually select that, and I'll just select it a bit bigger. There we go. Oh, it is a hairline actually. So it is a very fine line by default, but we could actually increase the thickness of that line to, let's say, 1 point. It's hardly noticeable. I'll zoom right in and I'll undo. So you can see there's the hairline, very, very fine, and I'll redo. There's the 1 point. It's quite a bit thicker. So you can actually choose how thick you want that line. You don't want to make it too thick because then it becomes inaccurate as a pattern, the thicker the line, because you're going to have, extra millimetres of width of the line. But you can make it easier to see. And so you can then go ahead and this is an SVG file, so you could actually export that, save it to your, you don't need to open it in Corel to see it. I just did that to show you about the line thickness, so you could then save that as an SVG file again with this thicker line, and then take it to your cut machine, or you could leave it as a hairline because your cutting machine will still read that. So this would be if you want to print and cut with scissors. It's still an improvement on the print function in the software. Okay. Right, so that's for a simple one. It goes into the center of the page. And so if you had other applique parts, it will spread it out over the page if you choose automatically distributed. We'll get to that later. So let's close that Corel. So I'm not going to save changes, no. So that was such a simple operation to get that SVG file. Now if you have a more complex design, I'll show you the procedure for that applique. So I made this applique from actually one of the images provided in the software. And I've actually used the Advanced Applique tool to do that. And by default, the Advanced Applique gives you a placement line, a tack down line, and cover stitches. And as you can see, I've actually merged all these yellow petals together to make one piece of fabric. I didn't want to cut separate petals, and so that's why I've got this placement line actually going round the edge of the petals and not breaking them up into individual petals. Same with the tack down line. It's only the cover stitch that then goes over and breaks up the individual petals. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to export the cutting file now for this. So I'm going to go export cutting file. Now I'm going to call this test because I've already done it and I don't want to write over the one I've done, because this is where I ran into trouble. So I've put automatically distributed, and I only want the applique shapes. I don't want embroidery shapes. I don't want cut work shapes. And I'm going to export it to my cutting files. So all that's good, and export. Now if I go into my cutting files, I should have one called test. So let's open that even just in Microsoft Edge, and there's nothing there. So it seemed to do it, but it just did not create the outlines. Now I'll close that and I'll try opening it in Corel. Open with CorelDRAW. And again, nothing on the page. It does say in layer 1 that I've got a group of 1 object and that I'm showing it and it's not locked, but it's not there. And I've zoomed in and zoomed out a number of times. So I thought, what's going on here? And so I closed that, and I don't want to save that. So let's delete that test so I don't run into trouble again. And I don't need that one either. Delete that while I'm here. Alright, so this is what I wanted to see, which is the petal shape and the center of the daffodil shape. And this is what I mean by automatically distributed. So I wanted the two separate objects, but they didn't happen. So what I found was that I had to actually break apart the applique before it would work. Now, I don't know why, because these are closed objects. This little shape for the center is a closed object, and the outline around the petals is a closed object, as far as I can tell. So you must have closed objects for it to create a cutting, for it to create the SVG, and I have those, so I'm not sure what's going on. But if we select the daffodil, and the whole thing will select because it's an applique object, and we click on break apart, it will then, when I go to export cutting file, and I'll call this one test, just so we can find it. And I'll do it as digitized this time, just to see the difference. The first one I showed you that I've already done was automatically distributed, so this time I'll do it as digitized and see what happens. Now this is interesting. It's actually put a check mark next to embroidery shapes. Now what that means is if I leave that there, it will actually make an SVG of the outlines of the embroidery shapes. I'll leave it there, but normally I would deselect that, but I'll leave it there just to show you what happens. Okay, so we'll export that, and we'll open it up. And here's my test SVG, and it's done two files, one for the applique, which is test applique, and one for the embroidery, which is test embroidery. So let's have a look at the test applique first. And remember, I didn't automatically distribute it, so I've actually got the two shapes on top of each other. This line in the center looks darker because there's two lines there. So if I opened this in Corel, I could drag that off, but we don't want to have to do that. So I'm going to close that, and I'll just show you what the embroidery SVG looks like. So I've got all these shapes of all the embroidery elements, which is, I'm not quite sure why I would use those, to be honest. So yeah, I would just normally deselect that option when I was exporting. So I'm going to delete both of those files. And go yes, and I'm going to do it the way that worked the best for me, which was to break apart the applique, then go to the export cutting file, deselect the embroidery shapes because I don't want those, and choose automatically distributed. So I'll select that one and export. Cancel that. I need to change this to test so it doesn't overwrite my other one, and export it. Okay, so now if I go into there, here's my test SVG. If I double click on it, it will open, and there you can see I've got my two separate pieces. I've got the piece for the petals, and I've got the piece for the center. So I could now send that SVG file to my scan and cut, or if you have another type of cutting machine, you could open this in a software that will allow you to save it as an FCM, for instance. So you could then get your cutting machine to cut those out. So in summary, we now have a new, in the Applique toolbox, we now have a new export cutting file tool, which makes it very easy to export an SVG file for cutting machines. However, if you do an advanced applique where you merge fabrics together, then you will have to break that applique apart before you can use the tool effectively. So all other applique files it will work with or should work with, including advanced applique files that do not have merged fabrics. So it's only in the case of merged fabrics in the advanced applique that there is a problem, and the solution is to just break that applique apart before you export your cutting file. So it's a very quick solution, it's no big deal, and it's certainly a lot quicker than the workaround we had to work with in previous versions. So hope you enjoyed that. If you have any issues with the software or any questions about the software, you can comment below, or you can contact me through my website, which the address for that's also below. And I do have a free machine machine digitizing community there that you can join, and I have extra help on that available through that community too. You can talk amongst yourselves, or you can pose questions to me, and you can also share images of your work that you're doing. So feel free to join up with that community as well. I will be holding a Zoom meeting again soon, and that will be posted on my website as well, and that's going to be about a hand-look tapestry type technique. So that's another reason for joining up the community. You hear about all those extra courses and things I have to offer. Thank you very much.